Hi, I'm Gaku. Welcome to the War Room number 25. In this campaign, I'm playing as Russia, and there are a few things that are unusual about this campaign. First off, this campaign began with a draft in which players leveraged their pick order for deciding which country they got versus how much free infamy they got during the course of the game. This bonus infamy could be traded between players in any way. And at this moment, thanks to a trade with Egypt, I now have 19 free infamy. That's quite a bit. Second, this campaign has been unusual among multiplayer games because we actually started with a Bavaria player. Now, to a lot of players, this simply seemed like a big middle finger pointed straight north to Prussia because the fact that there's a South German Federation means that it's a whole lot harder for Germany to form. Now, in order to keep the South German Federation alive and to keep Germany from forming and becoming a strong rival, France, SGF, and Austria-Hungary have been allied since the very beginning of the game. In the very first session, I was actually allied to the three of them. Now on the other side of the ring there's the UK, which ended up going to Gurren. So Gurren's using his diplomatic skills to try and leverage everything he possibly can, and as you can see he's doing a fantastic job of taking over all of Southeast Asia. So he's locked down India and everything around it completely. Now at the end of the session before last we actually had a bit of a discussion, and I don't think I posted that on YouTube, but the idea went something like this. France, SGF, Austria-Hungary, me, and Sweden were all going to partition NGF. And the plan basically went, the western part was going to go to France. The part above the SGF was going to go to the SGF. The highly industrial parts, including Schlesien, were going to go to Austria-Hungary. I was going to get essentially East Prussia plus Posen. And then Holstein, Mecklenburg, part of this area would go to Sweden. So the idea was, rather than have a potential rival where anyone against us could land troops and invade, we're just going to kill them outright. Now that was the plan we came up with at the end of the session 2 sessions ago. Last session that didn't quite work out. The first problem was that our Sweden player didn't show up, which meant that Sweden couldn't actually take part in the war. The second problem was that Austria-Hungary was replaced by a sub, and the sub really had no idea what he was doing. And in fact, he was so completely out of the loop on everything that we were doing that France and I were convinced he was actively working against us and trying to help the NGF, so we completely wrote him out of our plans. SGF, thinking that nothing was going to happen, wasted a full 25 infamy to remove the neutrality of Switzerland. And since SGF had 25 infamy at that point, it meant that he couldn't really take any of it. So, as you can see, France got eastern Switzerland, and then Sardinia-Piedmont took western Switzerland. Even at the expense of not forming Italy, he decided to take western Switzerland, which makes no sense. Also, he lost Tuscany, which is incredible. But Italy's never going to form, so just forget about that. Anyway, SGF didn't have infamy to take anything. Austria-Hungary was pretty much useless. And for whatever reason, France didn't want to take any land in the war that we had just planned. So the plan was, France and I were going to declare war. I was going to take Posen, and basically we'd just peace out, because France would take land later. And then, at the end of the session, Austria-Hungary would be back. SGF would have drops of infamy and whatnot. So basically, we declared war. UK has been allied with the NGF, and they actually joined the war, but they didn't invade Persia or really do anything. They just kind of sat here, so that worked out fine. I invaded from the east. France invaded from the west. However, the NGF sent its entire army over to deal with me. I did manage to isolate a very large stack of theirs in Allenstein, and it was not going well as far as the dice rolls went, but eventually that unit would have been completely wiped, so he ended up surrendering, which is fortunate for me just because it saved me a lot of pops, which would have been kind of annoying to replenish, but didn't go quite as easily as I expected in the east, but I made a few blunders as far as troop movements, so that was my fault. Anyway, NGF surrendered. France, as stated, didn't take anything, and I took Posen. Now, Posen is not a fantastic state, and in Russia it's the 13th most populous state right now, with about 2/3 of a million pops, which, is good if you're a tiny nation, but for Russia it's not fantastic. And if we take a look at Ostpreußen and Westpreußen, let's see, where are they? They're way down here. We've got 400k and 400k. So another 800k between the two of these states, and this is the part that's been promised to Russia. So, if the campaign had gone as we had previously planned, and that would have been another 22 infamy that I'd spend right here on these two states. And, for what? Nice looking border, I guess, but it's Poland. Who really wants Poland, right? But I decided that I could use this to my benefit and leverage the land that I'd just taken in a unique way. Now, because of the alliance that's formed between France, SGF, Austria-Hungary, and me, there's been a sort of a counter-alliance that's arisen, and that's UK opposing everything that we do, NGF, which is allied with the UK just so they don't die, Japan, which has been sucking the UK's dick continuously, and finally the USA, which is basically annoyed at the fact that we're allied to each other and is just opposing us for the sake of opposing us. So basically we've got Central Europe versus everyone else. Egypt is technically on the UK side, but really he's neutral, and the Ottomans are also kind of staying out of things. But basically that's the setup. So France, SGF, Austria-Hungary, Russia versus UK, NGF, Japan, and USA if it went to all-out war. Now, you can see the problem here is that every time we declare one NGF, the entire other alliance could come in against us, right? And they could also just pile troops in NGF, and this be just this massive war to take a tiny bit of useless land. So, my idea was to leverage this land in a way that would break apart their alliance. NGF being allied to the UK is a big problem. NGF not being allied to the UK helps me a great deal. So I made a deal with the NGF, and it goes against everything that we'd planned up until this point. But I think it will benefit us more in the long run. So the idea goes something like this. NGF and I are entering into a defensive alliance. That is, if anyone attacks NGF, I have to back the NGF. Which means France, SGF, and Austria-Hungary can't realistically attack NGF without getting stomped, because then I have to come in and, help out. And also the UK is probably going to be helping him too. Now, why would NGF sign a defensive pact with me? Well, here's the reason. NGF is going to be justifying an acquire state or an acquire colony on any target of my choosing. Once they've done that, they'll declare the war, and we're going to have a temporary offensive alliance for the purpose of that war. If we happen to take the land that he's declared for, then I'm going to take that land from him in a negotiated transfer. So I get the land that he declared war for, and then 5 years later, once our truce is up, he's going to declare war for Posen and get it back via negotiated transfer. So he gets his land back, I get land that I want more than Posen, and then we're defensively allied and can help each other potentially. So it's kind of up to him if he wants to continue it at that point, but that's the idea. So when this was posted on the forums, everyone knew that I had one target in mind. So before I tell you who NGF is going to justify on my behalf, I'm just going to give you a few seconds to try and figure it out on your own. Okay, if you guess Austria-Hungary, that's an excellent guess, and here's why. Number one, France, SGF, and Austria-Hungary have been allied the entire game, which means NGF now has the potential to take land via cultural kin from SGF, also potentially Alsace-Lorraine in a bid to form Germany. Basically wipe out SGF, maybe even take Bohemia off of Austria, depending on what he wants to do. But basically, he'd declare war for either East or West Galicia. I'd justify for the other one, so basically we would have 2 states as the war goal, and we'd just pile in troops endlessly and pound Austria down into the ground and take those 2 states. I'd take one, he'd take the other, he'd maybe get some other stuff out of it as well. He'd transfer one of the states to me, and then I'd transfer Posen to him. That's an excellent idea, but that's actually not what we're doing. If you guess the Ottoman Empire, then you really need to spend some more time playing Victoria too, because there's absolutely nothing for Russia to take in the Ottoman Empire. Obviously there's some stuff that Austria might want, like Bosnia and parts of Serbia, but for Russia, really there's just nothing here. There's better stuff. If you guessed anything in India, then you certainly know who my rivals are, and yes, the UK is my #1 rival, but this would be very impractical. This is a superpowered UK with players lining up to suck his dick. He's got more brigades than is reasonable. He's got a fully professional army of over 300 troops, and he's got an impenetrable mountain line with just an endless sea of units to back up and wipe out anything that we could throw at it. So yes, in some cases it is a good idea to try and take parts of India. This is not one of those cases. This is not going anywhere. This is staying with the UK. Now that leaves the last target, which if you guessed it, congratulations. The correct answer is Japan. I'm going for Manchuria. Now, unfortunately for Marconi, Japan has been played by really not so great substitutes for the last 2 sessions. And if we take a look at Japan, they only have 12 military tech. At the moment, I'm just about to get to 20. They're way behind in tech. They only have 115 brigades. They can mobilize another 100 more. Approximately 50 of these units are artillery, which means there's just not a lot here defending this border. NGF can justify declare war for Manchuria for 33 war score. If the war drags on for long enough, then I'll be adding additional states, Pyongyang here in North Korea. So if we win the war, NGF acquires Manchuria, Manchuria gets transferred to me, in return Posen gets transferred back to NGF, and we stay allied, and I now have a beautiful border with an additional, let's see exactly how much it is, 2.2 million pops for the low price of 800,000 in a war that was over by Christmas. So there are a lot of things that can go wrong in this scenario. The one advantage that I have is that most people, at least initially, thought that I was going for Austria, which means that if the people that I've told my plans haven't already told Gurren, there's a really good chance that they're not going to have any idea what's coming until I'm already stacking troops on the border. So they're all going to be watching for Austria to die, but in fact I'm going to be putting troops over on the eastern front. It's going to become super obvious once I start doing this, so I've only got a short window of time to do this. There's going to be a lot of death as my troops march across Siberia, unfortunately, but that's just the way it goes. Now my supply limit in Siberia is actually pretty decent, and even on the hills I can get 60 troops without attrition, even though it says less than that. The only place I have to watch out are the mountains, so I can safely put 230 stacks in every single province everywhere in Siberia, with the exception of the mountain provinces. The problem is, when you take a whole bunch of troops, select them like so, and tell them to all go to one place, they're going to be crossing over each other and taking massive attrition, because every time a unit moves on top of another one, there's an attrition tick in addition to the monthly attrition tick. So when you have like 120,000 troops on top of each other, all moving synchronously together, it's really bad. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is take all my troops and organize them into 60k stacks somewhere in this area, just so they aren't marching on top of each other the entire way. And once I do that, I'll be moving 60 stacks in a sort of staggered way across to the east. And obviously there's some number of troops over here. There's 7 brigades so far. So I'm going to be sending one of these units over to defend Kamchatka in the unlikely, very unlikely event of Japan marching troops into Kamchatka, but it is a possibility. But I will be putting one unit there, and the rest are all going to be piled 2 at a time on each of the provinces here. So best case scenario, they don't realize that I'm piling troops over here until it's too late. We declare war, and then surprise invasion, Japan's not mobilized, and we move in and win. That's very unlikely. Japan's probably going to mobilize. They're going to start packing troops on the border. They can put all their best generals on the border. And it's going to be a really rough situation. So let's talk specifics here. I've got 2 pretty decent generals. They're not the best generals in the world, but they're pretty decent. The best attack general right here is a 4-1, 21% morale and organization. So he's going to be leading the charge. And this is my best defensive general, which is going to be guarding the southern border, and I'll show you exactly what that means. So first, I drew a line behind the front. These are all the exposed provinces for Japan. In the back, we have the provinces that can feed troops into the front. This hill province can be reinforced effectively from 2 provinces. This one in the front can only be reinforced from 1 province. This province in the east can be reinforced from 1, 2, and 3 if we actually go through the front from this province, because it is possible to walk through the front to get to it. And finally, this province on the front can be reinforced from 1, 2 provinces, which means that this province is the most exposed and the hardest to defend, because most everything that's going to it has to go through this one province. It also means that anything that doesn't go through this province is going to be stacked on top of something else and probably going to be causing attrition there, so that's actually a good thing. So this province is the best place to attack if there's just a single assault being made. Now this province in the bottom is only accessible from a single province on the Russian side, so this one is the absolute worst place to attack, and there's going to be no assaults here until we at least break through into Manchuria, assuming we can break through. On the Russian side it's a little bit harder to see, but I'll go ahead and draw it out for you. Again, this is the back line, which means that everything in front of this can be assaulted directly by Japan. So I've done in the back here is drawn the likely reinforcement routes for the Russians, and there's a few very obvious problems. Number one is that all troops have to filter through a relatively small number of provinces to get to the front. And number two, getting through those provinces requires going through, well, Siberia doesn't matter, but these mountains sure do. So the best place to reinforce is actually across the mountains, but that's the place where you get the absolute most attrition. So there's no way to really pile 60k troops on here. So it is possible to move them across 30 at a time, But that's about really all that can be managed here. As you can see, the supply limit's only 35 here. So that means the real fronts, the real reinforcement lines are this one in the west and this one in the east going down this way. It means that attacking in the south is completely impossible and impractical, at least until we've broken through. So the troops in these provinces are going to be focused on defense and nothing more. Also, there's the very slim possibility of a Japanese counterattack, which would cut off this province, which means this is where my 4 defense generals going right here. But aside from that, I'm going to be focused on the offensive. Now, as you can see, this province is the most exposed Japanese province, and everything reinforcing it has to go through these forests. So the best possible place to attack is actually right here, if the front is stationary. If the front's not stationary, then it might be useful to attack on multiple places at once. But it really depends on how many troops I can get over here before war is declared. If the entire line is set up, and troops are in place, and I know exactly which troops are going where, then great, we can attack into 2 provinces simultaneously. But if it's still kind of haphazard and things are getting set up, and Japan's got a complete line all the way across the front, there's absolutely no reason to attack in these other places, and I'll just try and do as much damage as I possibly can here in Aigun. Now, if the offensive succeeds, then the domino effect would be expected to go something like Aigun falls first because it's being attacked from 3 provinces. Now once this province is taken, that means this province that's exposed in the south can be attacked from 3 provinces, with this one being reinforced continuously. Once that happens, we can attack into probably the forests here, because really anywhere else in the south requires going through a very narrow front. So even though this would be painful, it would be useful to try and attack into this province. It might actually be useful to do a simultaneous assault into the hills here. And basically, once these 2 provinces fall, then all of the rest of Manchuria falls with it, because this is all plains and there's really no defense here. So that's the best case scenario. Japan gets wrecked, I march through and take Manchuria and North Korea. Now, how am I going to get enough troops over here to do all this? Basically, my 14 units on the Persian front, 12 of these are going to become 60k stacks and move over this way. All of my troops on the western front, the ones that I was fighting NGF with not too long ago, 17 units, the vast majority of these are 60 stacks. These are all going to be headed east, mostly to deal with Manchuria. A handful of troops are going to stay around in Russia just in case the UK decides to try a naval landing on St. Petersburg or something. It's a possibility, but it's unlikely, especially since the units would be isolated and might get stack wiped. Now, NGF is going to be allied with me for the purposes of this war, so NGF is also going to be taking part. They're going to be moving their troops to deal with UK in the south, and also a few extra troops to throw their best generals into the battles in the east. So the vast majority is going to be on defensive. They're going to be defending their own borders, my exposed borders, the Persian front, and a few extra troops here and there to throw in generals where needed. So that's the plan. I already went over the best case scenario. What's the worst case scenario? Well, the worst case is a lot of people can backstab us, which means that if I were to declare war on Japan, Austria knows about the plan. He could just as easily ally Japan and then join against the 2 of us. Same with France. Obviously USA could join, but because we're not part of a super coalition, he'd be less inclined to do that. USA doesn't really care about UK versus Russia, aside from the fact that Russia was in this super coalition. So since I'm not in the super coalition and taking my own initiative against the UK indirectly via Japan, it means that he's unlikely to join. So the absolute worst case, either France or Austria-Hungary turning on us. A not quite as bad but still really awful scenario would be the UK actually just shipping a few troops over to Japan. It doesn't even matter how many, because as I mentioned, Japan has 12 military tech and I have 20, or I will here very soon. But military tech goes according to whoever's leading the battle. So if the UK sends his best general on a single stack and ferries him over to Japan and just throws him into the battle, instead of fighting some shitty Japanese stack like I was a minute ago, I'm now fighting a fully professional UK quality stack, which is a bit of a problem considering he's got a lot of troops in close proximity that can pour into any one of these provinces. So that would be a problem, but we could still probably hold out. And if the UK decided to ship a whole bunch of troops over, there are a few other possibilities. An invasion of India is impractical, and even if we did invade, he could basically use the same principle here. He's got a ton of miners. He can just call them into war. He has a single UK stack. He throws a bunch of miners behind it. Well, now all those miners with their shit tech magically have UK level tech because the UK is leading the battle. And this could happen anywhere along the lines. So invading here is impractical. And if the UK does try to pull some shit, the home front is completely undefended, which means that if anyone were so inclined, France, USA, hell, even Spain, anyone can land troops in the UK because the UK is going to be focused elsewhere. He's going to be watching the front. He's not going to be watching his home, which means doing something like landing in Ireland, for example, and just taking over it would be very, very easy to do. It is true that the UK has a massive navy, 99 heavy ships, which no one else is even close to. But still, just the fact that he's not going to be looking at this area means that it'd be very easy to just sneak some troops on if people wanted to. I don't know if anyone's going to do that. It really depends on how actively and aggressively the UK decides to fight this war. And I think it's also going to depend partly on what he wants to get out of it as a result. Colonization is also going to be continuing soon, which means if this war drags on long enough, that's actually going to be to our benefit because as Japan and UK scramble looking around the map trying to find colonies that they can click on, we're just going to be focused on the front. So NGF knows the plan. Approximately 6 months after the start of the game, he's going to be justifying war. And about a year after that, we're going to be declaring war. So it'll be about 1883 when we declare war, probably a little bit after. At some point, obviously Japan's going to see the buildup. You can't really hide behind the front when the provinces are this gigantic. Yeah, I mean, there's just nowhere to put your troops. You got to put them on the front. So he's going to see the buildup. He's going to say something. UK is going to start shipping troops. So hopefully we can attack before too many troops have been shipped over. But, you know, who knows. Also on the bright side, it's going to be very difficult for the Japanese to mount any sort of counter-offensive if they decide to do that. Anyway, that's the plan. We'll see how well it pans out. It might just be a complete disaster because there's just a lot of logistics here. So I did a test game in single player. I've got a fairly decent idea of how this is going to go. So getting this set up is not going to be easy, and we'll see how well it works, but this is probably going to be one of the most difficult logistical things I've ever done in a Victoria game. Just moving across Siberia is not easy if you're trying to not take too much attrition. And this comes second only to the most difficult thing that I've done, which was also playing Russia and moving across Siberia. So I think this is going to be very, very close in terms of difficulty. But we'll see if I can pull it off. I do have a bit of debt to manage, so have to be careful about that. We'll be turning education and administration all the way down. Probably military spending as well, because I don't really need more soldiers right now. And I can compensate for that just by focusing on soldiers and national focuses, at least for a little while. So I'm trying to build up a bit of a war chest in the year and a half before the war starts. There is a decent chance this will end in complete disaster, but we'll see how it goes. So thanks for watching and have a good one.